Welcome to the Pharma Podcast, conversations with industry experts and business leaders about important and current topics in Canadian pharma, biotech, and medtech. I'm your host, Sam Tarantino. On this episode of the Pharma Podcast, my guest is Dr. Durhane Wong-Rieger, President and CEO at the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, also known as CORD, and the current chair at the Rare Disease International Council. On the last day of February each year, we mark our calendars to bring awareness to rare diseases. February 28th this year is Rare Disease Day. There is no better way for the Pharma Podcast to mark this day than to have Durhane on as an extra special guest. Welcome to the Pharma Podcast, Durhane. Thank you very much. Really pleased to be here. So tell us about Rare Disease Day and what it means to you, your organization, and the patients it serves. Rare Disease Day, as you say, is the last day in February. And when we're lucky, and the first Rare Disease Day was on February 29th, obviously because it's a very rare day. It is an opportunity really to bring together the entire rare disease community. It was first launched in Europe by Eurodis. I will say we were the first country to do it internationally. So the first Rare Disease Day was actually an international Rare Disease Day. Canada was right there. With 7,000, 8,000 rare diseases, disorders, it really is important to bring everybody together to really demonstrate that not only are there commonalities in these rare diseases, but in fact strategies that one could bring into place to actually diagnose, treat, care for patients, actually work right across the spectrum. Most important thing, though, is by coming together, we actually can raise a significant awareness and hopefully move policy, access to resources, and improve the identification, care, treatment of patients. So it's an opportunity to bring everybody together. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't know exactly which iteration of Rare Disease Day we're in right now. But, over the years, we've seen the community grow from, as I say, originally about 24, 25 countries to now well over, 400 countries and certainly thousands of organizations that take part. So tell us about yourself and why you became such a strong advocate for patients with rare disorders. It would be easy to say that I'm really involved because I do actually have two children who were both born diagnosed with rare diseases. One of them has never gotten a diagnosis. The other one was diagnosed at birth and was able to be managed pretty effectively because they're very good treatment guidelines, specialists, etc. But really, it wasn't the case. I am a psychologist by training and professor at university, got involved actually with hemophilia. And they asked for some help at the time of the whole tainted blood issue and trying to get access to, first of all, what happened, getting access to compensation, getting access to new products, getting changes in terms of policy so that we can be assured it's not going to happen again. And at the end of the day, what we really pushed for and got is an independent blood agency that would be publicly accountable and actually include in members of the community in terms of governing boards and working groups, etc. So for me, that was the driver coming into understanding kind of what the power of patient advocacy could be. And I will say after I kind of spent some 7 years almost on this cause, it took 7 years from beginning to the final conclusion with the setup of the two Canadian blood agencies. I decided to leave the university, go into advocacy full-time without any real job, was approached by, at that time, CORD, which was operating out of a small town in Alberta, to help draft an orphan drug policy. Because in Canada, despite the fact that many other countries already had specific policies that would encourage not only research and development, but access to treatments for rare diseases, Canada had decided it really not only didn't need it, they actually declared that we would not have it. So that was kind of my first intro to it. Wrote the policy, became an advocate, joined the board, and eventually became the president of CORD, which I actually carried that role for about 6 years as a volunteer. Tell us about CORD and its mission. Yeah, thanks. CORD is the National Alliance of Rare Disease Patient Organizations, though we do have individual members as well. And we also have
networks of clinical groups, etc. They're also members. But really, we are the voice for rare diseases in Canada. We lead in terms of policy. We fight in terms of access to diagnosis and treatment. We actually advocate not as much as we would like to because we don't have the resources. Sometimes for individuals who are trying to get access. So we do see ourselves as the voice of the rare disease patient, also helping support rare disease patient organizations so they can become more effective, so they can join together as a voice. Sometimes we bring together several organizations, groups that are all working on the same disease, but sometimes don't even know each other, so that they can actually speak with one voice as well. So for us, it's been a great opportunity to work nationally to actually see the changes that we're able to push in terms of federal government, provincial governments, and some terms, certainly in terms of clinical practice, clinical trials. We really have been trying in Canada to work as that single focus point in terms of advancing rare diseases.
You are also the chair of the Rare Disease International Council. So tell us about the Rare Disease International Council and its mission.
So Rare Diseases International is an independent organization as well. It is a global alliance. So if you think about CORD as being a national alliance, we're made up of national organizations for rare disorders. We're made up of international rare disease groups like the World Federation of Hemophilia. And, that, again, we'll try to speak and advance policy on a global level. And I chair the council, or would be the board of directors for the organization. I mean, over the years, what we've been able to do, for instance, with the UN Declaration on Universal Health Coverage, we got them to include a specific recognition that rare diseases is an underserved, under-recognized population. And as countries are putting together policies and programs for universal health coverage, we need to pay attention to rare diseases. Otherwise, it would be missed. We, in 2019, had the great opportunity for the United Nations Declaration on Rare Diseases, which recognizes rare diseases as not just a medical condition, but a social condition, an educational disadvantage, an equity issue, a human rights issue. And this calls upon many other UN organizations to help support and promote rare diseases. The most important thing about this is that we have been able to advance frameworks and policies which allow national rare disease organizations, but also more individual organizations, to go to their health systems, to go to their policymakers, to go to their governments and say, don't forget us. You sign on to these declarations, you recognize us, we have a right to get access to. We have a right to participate with you. We have these proposals and we need you to listen to them. We need you to support us. I mean, interesting, in many countries, especially Asian countries, etc., patients don't think they have a right to health care. And rare disease patients, because it's been drummed into them over and over again. You're such small numbers. You're so difficult to diagnose. You're so difficult to take care of. We don't have the special for it. It's so expensive to take care of you. You have no right to the same care as others. And what these global policies say, not true. Everybody has a right, and we love the tagline that was with it, is that leave no one behind. And that means rare diseases. So we've given people an opportunity, a voice. We also help them in terms of designing what a policy within a universal health coverage policy would look like if it included rare diseases. We help them design and support legislation that would call for rare disease laws or policies in their country. I travel and I actually speak remotely to many gatherings. I mean, I'm going to be speaking, for instance, even on Rare Disease here with the Peruvian organization, which is hosting a half-a-day forum, so I'll be calling into that. We're actually going to be, speaking with the Global Alliance, in terms of some of the other activities that will be coming up with regard to the World Health Assembly coming up in May. It gives us an opportunity to really try to support many of these countries that are, really struggling to get rare diseases recognized, but also it's also helping promote health coverage in many of these areas. So, rare diseases, we think is a great instigator in improving overall, healthcare, health policies in many countries.
I'd like to explore how we can improve access to new therapies for rare disorders. I'd like to focus on both the regulatory framework and funding / investing in rare disorders in Canada, and what can we learn from other countries? So how can access to new therapies be improved?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me take a half a step back and say, access to therapies, and especially drug therapies, right? It's not the be all and end all. Only still about 5 or 6% of rare diseases actually have a therapy. Mind you, those are the most populous rare diseases, so they actually cover a large portion of the numbers of people with rare diseases. The challenge, of course, is getting access to them. And Canada has many, deficiencies, quite frankly, in both the regulatory and in the access framework. Currently, we only get about 60% of the drugs that are approved for rare diseases by the FDA in the U.S. or the European Medicines Agency. That's a tragedy, because in many cases, each one of those therapies is the only therapy for that rare disorder. And in some of those cases, there's significant therapies that can make a huge impact in terms of quality of life, in terms of longevity, in terms of symptom management, and yet we can't get access to them for lots of reasons, which are built into the way we do our regulations, the way we do our pricing, the way we do access. So this is a huge problem. I mean, we sometimes say, which is worse, to not have a treatment for your disease or to know there's a treatment and you can't get access to it. I mean, that's a tragedy. We also don't get them very fast. Sometimes it takes 2 to 5 years for a drug to come to Canada that's already approved elsewhere. So we're already behind the 8 ball before we even get, the drug into Canada. I will say for Health Canada, they're doing a really good job. They have an expedited framework. They recognize orphan designations by other countries. They do mutual, recognitions at times. They do collaborative reviews. We actually don't have a huge quarrel with Health Canada once the drug gets there. They seem to do a good job. Even in terms of the indications they approve, they're similar to what other countries are doing. I think they've really paid attention and they've tried to move, in line with it. The real problem we have, quite frankly, is when we try to get to access. Only about 60%, 2/3 of the drugs that are actually approved by Health Canada actually end up getting funded. Only about 25% of them actually get to the people who need them, even after they've kind of negotiated a funding agreement. I mean, talk about tragedy upon tragedy. So, you've got patients who, in many cases, internationally recognizing what's available, right? We're all online, we're all in Google, we belong to international patient groups. We know what's there. We know what other patients are getting. And what we are fighting for is to try to get that. And we're fighting it step by step by step, and it doesn't happen. I mean, we have a drug right now for, retinal blindness, and it was approved, the first gene therapy approved in Canada in 2019. It still isn't being made available to patients in Ontario. Even though now we fought it through, the regulatory approval was actually not a big deal. Getting it approved and some recognition by the Health Technology Assessment Agency, getting the provinces and the PCPA to sign an agreement on it. Now we've signed the agreement and it gets to the individual provinces and they're dithering. They're basically coming up with all kinds of reasons why they can't actually make it available in Ontario. If you live in Alberta, you can get access to it. If you live in Quebec, you can get access to it. This is a problem we've got. And the biggest tragedy is this is a time-limited treatment. That means that the retinal cones are diminishing, and the patients can only benefit if they still have a certain percentage of retinal cones in which the drug can be deposited. Once you've passed that point, it doesn't come back. I mean, so we're fighting, for individuals, and these are children. These are adolescents we're talking about, that are really at risk of losing their eyesight because, we've been dithering all along the way. So we do need to change our overall approach to bringing these therapies in so that we, number one, the reason why 60% of the drugs, are only come to Canada is because drug companies, manufacturers look and say, oh my gosh, why am I bothering? Because it takes so long and may not even get listed. And even if it gets listed, it may not get available to people. We have got to change what we're doing. And that's why, we have been working with the government in terms of trying to bring in this new rare disease drug strategy. We need to change the overall way in which we approach drugs. And we have really been quite excited by, the announcement that was made in 2019 by the federal government to invest $1 billion to set up a rare disease drug strategy. And I use the word invest. I quit talking about it as funding, as financing, or any kind of payments. It's not a payment. It's an investment. Because when we invest, we actually get returns. When we invest, we get benefits. And we need to think about it as an investment. We say just because we're not actually paying for some of these treatments and we don't actually pay and do well in terms of diagnosing and treating these patients, it doesn't mean they don't cost the healthcare system money. Research coming out of other countries shows that 9 out of 10 pediatric beds are actually taken up by patients with rare diseases. 1 out of 15 babies that are born in Canada actually is born with a rare disease. You know what? 30% of those kids will die before their 5th birthday. This is what we're talking about. 24,000 kids in Canada born each year with a rare disease. You can count out the fact that 8,000 of them will have died. I'm not saying we can save every one of them, but we can do a whole lot better. We can diagnose them earlier. We can actually make sure they get to a specialist. We can make sure that if they're living in an outlying community, that their healthcare professional, their GP, knows who to go to. This is our proposal under this rare disease drug strategy. And, so we're quite excited about where we're going with it. But I would tell you, what we've said back to the government is we don't want $1 billion to fund drugs. We want $1 billion to build a rare disease infrastructure so that we can, number one, diagnose people quickly, accurately. Still takes 4 to 7 years to get a diagnosis. Can you believe it? You have a baby that's born. You know something is wrong. It may take you up to 4 years, 7 years to get a diagnosis. And along the way, you'll get 4 misdiagnoses, which means 1, if it was something you could have actually done something about, and many of the diseases you can from birth, and may only take a drug, you miss that opportunity. Or 2, you get misdiagnosed, and guess what? You get prescribed a whole bunch of other kinds of treatments that actually are not only not useful, they actually can be harmful. So this is the quagmire that we're in. I have a new grandson that's going to be born. We hopefully in a week and a half. I'm really pressing this. I'm going out to
Congratulations.
Edmonton. I'm going out to Edmonton to visit him, and I'm saying to Michelle, I said, "Could you get on the stick and have this kid before I get there? I like to see my new grandson." She says, "I'm doing my best." But we're all so excited, right? We have a new kid. That kid can be born. 1 out of 15 are born with a rare diseases. In many cases, we don't know it right off the bat. Yeah. If we have good newborn screening, we may be able to pick up some 25, 30 of those. If we don't, it may be not until they're symptomatic, and sometimes not until they're actually at school age. It may not be until they're really failing to thrive that we really begin to say, okay, something's wrong. And we take them to our local doctor, and the doctor says, I don't know, kid looks okay to me, just slow in development, just go home and feed more vitamins or whatever the heck. So this is what we need to change, right? And this is what we're
rare disease affects all of us. Speaking for myself, my family, I think we got 3. I have 3 little cousins with rare diseases.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know the heartache that the family went through and continues to go through. And all the trips to sick kids and all the tests and the pokes and the needles, and these are little children, and it's heartbreaking.
It is. And Sam, one of the things you said, why Rare Disease Day? Why the awareness? This happens over and over again. We say people say, I don't know about rare disease. And then you start to talking about what is a rare disease? What does that really mean? Sometimes, in fact, many of the pediatricians will tell us 90% of cases of children who have unknown diseases, right? It's a rare disease, right? So we need to be able to diagnose that. And then when you peel it back, people say, oh yeah, I do know people with rare diseases. And I think we all know somebody with rare disease. 1 out of 12, 1 out of 10 Canadians actually has a rare disease. So it's impossible for you not to know somebody with a rare disease. You just aren't aware of it. You don't actually know what the disease is. And obviously, in many cases, they're not sort of visible.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us a status update on where, on Canada's rare disease strategy and a pan-Canadian strategy, I guess, and I believe CORD is proposing a pan-Canadian or pan-Canadian centers of expertise to bring immediate and significant, added value to treating patients with rare disorders. Can you elaborate a little further?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. It is very important. I sit as chair, as you say, of Rare Diseases International, and we're working globally. We're working with the UN, we're working with WHO, we're working with many of the very best systems across the world, including the European reference networks, including the National Organizations of Rare Disease in the States, which has designated 31 centers of excellence, mostly within their pediatric hospitals. So this is the vision. I mean, when you talk about what is the biggest barrier to access, the biggest barrier to access is not price. The biggest barrier to access is we don't diagnose the right patient at the right time. So we got to get the diagnosis, and I think everybody agrees. We cannot afford to delay diagnosis because sometimes some of these therapies only work when pre-symptomatic or early as possible before very much advancement of the disease. And if we can't diagnose them, so we have to focus on diagnosis. And we're living in an era in which it's so possible. Newborn screening, we don't even have universal newborn screening in Canada. Depending on which province you're born in, you may get actually screened for some 30-some diseases. You live in the wrong province, you may only get 6 to 12 diseases. So this is the tragedy. So we need to do that, and it's so easy to do, and they're so cheap to do. Genetics, genomic sequencing. Once, we do begin to realize, Chang has a condition and we can't diagnose it based on the known rare diseases, we can actually sequence their genomes. I mean, this is what happens, so many people sign up for, 23andMe and, DNA, and you can get that. I mean, these are much more sophisticated than that, but it can help identify what that disease is, and we can get a diagnosis. So that's really important. But we need specialists to be able to confirm the diagnosis and then pick it up and do the right kinds of prescribing. So that's the idea of centers of expertise. Have centers where if you are a physician, healthcare provider outside, you know that there's a rare disease, you can send the information, you can send the test in, you can get a confirmation, and if necessary, you can send the patient. This is what some of the best centers in the U.S. do, and certainly what Europe does. We get a diagnosis, we then can start on a prescribed treatment. I mean, many of the challenges with these drugs for rare diseases is not only are they costly, and we do having to come back to costly because they are costly, and we want to be able to optimize what we're spending in terms of the return on it. I think what we want to do is make sure it gets to the right patient. And the challenge we have in many cases, because these are small patient populations, we have to do small clinical trials. We can't do thousands of patients clinical trials. We don't have thousands. A good-sized clinical trial for a rare disease is 50, 60 patients. The challenge is that you have a lot of uncertainty then in terms of how well the drug will work, how well would it work for the entire patient population because you've only got a small segment of it. More importantly, you're doing short clinical trials because if you recognize this is a therapy that possibly could work, we're talking oftentimes about severe, disabling, progressive diseases that you want to treat as quickly as possible. So regulators know that. Health Canada knows that. The FDA knows that. They say, let's give it an approval so that we can get it to as many patients as possible, so long as we can be assured that the risks don't outweigh the benefits. We need to continue to monitor them. Sometimes we do these things that are called notice of compliance with conditions. We ask you to continue to monitor them. And we say, okay, make them available. A whole new lingo that many of us had not talked about before is this whole thing called real-world evidence. What's real-world evidence? It really is the patient responses, to a treatment or to a non-treatment in real life. That's all. It's, instead of putting you in a clinical trial and me collecting that information from you on a regular basis and you coming in and depositing it, I'm going to ask and get you to report that information as you experience it in real life. The problems, of course, it is much less structured. The information is much more difficult to get, and sometimes we don't even know exactly what information is going to be most valuable. So we need to create platforms that would allow, in the best case scenario, patients to report this information directly. That's again where centers of expertise come in. If we have a network of centers of expertise, we can bring in a national patient registry, a patient platform, which would allow us then to be able to collect that information from the patients, obviously be able to validate it so it can be structured depending on the disease. It can be open form. It can have, validators that would be able to review it. Hopefully, in the best case scenario, marry it with their, electronic health records, etc. We need to track these patients in real time to see how the drug is working. We need to make sure it's working as it's supposed to. We make sure that there aren't significant adverse effects. And then at the end of whatever period of time, we reassess the information. Did it do what it's supposed to do? Is it to bring in the benefits that it's supposed to bring? And then we can talk about, what's the right pricing for it. So don't spend, 7 years up front negotiating on a price. Give it to people the way it was intended, monitor them in real life, have escape clauses that say if it doesn't work, take the patients off. If they suffer adverse events and we agree, we take them off, and then reassess at the end. It's a bit what Germany does. It's a bit what France does. It's a bit what Belgium does. It's a bit what Netherlands does. They all have these very good programs that are managed access, coverage with evidence development, accelerated, early entry programs, whatever you want to call them. They're all the same concept. Make it available, get real information, and then assess.
Yeah. Now, on the Pan-Canadian Centers of Expertise, how would that tie into the current newborn screening program? And my sister-in-law happens to work at CHEO, and I believe her lab runs the national program, newborn screening. Are you advocating that this would work in collaboration with that existing national program and build on it?
So sadly, Sam, I will say we do not have a national program on newborn screening. We have a really great provincial program on newborn screening. And this is the sad part. Every province has their own newborn screening program, except for, the Atlantic, which kind of coordinates between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So we don't. We should have a national program on newborn screening. And the people that run the program actually informally among themselves coordinate and collaborate, but it's not national. So yeah, our vision is that we would have a rare disease network. In that we would have, like the U.S., designated centers of expertise, and we would see most of the Children's Hospital being designated as a center of expertise, being a reference network, not for all and every disease, but having expertise in unknown diseases, getting genomic information, being able to counsel families, and then sending them to the right specialty. Within it also would be specialty networks. So that would include our existing neuromuscular networks, cystic fibrosis networks, hemophilia networks, ALS. These are disease specialty networks. And again, being part of a bigger network, being able to work under, certain policy, patient organizations would be part of it. With that, the kinds of specialty services, including newborn screening, would be affiliated with it. Could be a member of the network. I don't know exactly how it works. It would still work the way it does, but it would be better coordinated across all of the, newborn screening programs, and it would coordinate directly into the centers of expertise so that they can pick up on that information, be able to use that information to provide genetic counseling, to be able to, importantly, enroll these patients into a national patient registry. So that's, that's kind of the vision of it, right? We have another program in Canada, which is still under a pilot basis, called All for One, headed up in CHEO as well by Kim Boycott, which actually does genomic testing. So we don't pick them up in newborn screening. We still know something's wrong. We can't get them under our standard kind of okay, we know it's not this, this, and this. Let's do a genomic workup on them, and then we can, kind of get a diagnosis for them, at least in terms of what gene or genome is actually dysfunctional and creating this, and maybe we can understand, God, if this gene is supposed to do this, now we understand what kind of disease you've got, and maybe what the progression is. So we need to tie all that together. They are still programs that we hopefully would be, important, like components of a broader network.
So let's pivot now to access to new therapies. Let's explore funding, or as you earlier mentioned, investment in rare disease therapies. So novel therapies for rare disorders can be expensive. So tell us about the funding models in Canada for novel therapies that treat rare disorders.
The word expensive is only relative, right? We hear all the angst about rare disease drugs and how they're going to bust the drug budget. Remembering again in Canada, rare disease drugs only still account for about 2.5% of the total drug spend. We spend less on rare disease drugs than somebody says we spend on cannabis, for God's sakes. There's no way this is going to happen. Now, what we're hoping is there's a lot more rare disease drugs and that Canada does a better job. But at best, we'll only get to about 6%. That's what the projections are. What we have to also look at is, of course, we all know, why they're so expensive on a per patient basis, because there are small numbers that are really important in terms of building, the drug program and the drug plan. But in many respects, they are not necessarily unreasonably expensive when we think about what it is that the benefits are. And of course, if we think about them as an investment, if we invest in them and we think about the return on the investment, we actually can do a lot better in terms of actually getting the benefits. I'm going to say something which I think is, I'm not 100% grounded in the facts of, but it's kind of true. We do know that it takes a lot of money to develop these drugs, but the companies also recognize they have a small patient population on which they're not only able to support the funding of that development of the drug, but to invest in the ongoing monitoring of the drug because of small numbers, to invest in terms of enhancements in terms of the drugs and in terms of future drug development. Companies come into Canada and they assume that they'll get maybe 25% of the patient population. Companies go into the U.S. and they assume they're only going to get 20% of the patient population. We think this U.S. is a haven for great, access to drugs. It's not true. Around the world, less than 1% of the people who could be eligible for a drug that's actually developed for a rare disease actually get that therapy. Think about it. 99% of the people this drug could benefit get no access. Now, it's a tragedy for patients, tragedy for everybody in the health system as well. But it also means that companies have to build their return on their investment based on the fact that I'm going to get 20%, 25%, 10% of the eligible patient population. So our goal is to say, why don't we give you everybody? If I gave you everybody, now what do you want to charge me? If we have an accelerated access program that would allow us to be able to put the patients on, identify for whom it works, be able to collect that information, and we'll give you information back so that you can understand more directly which patients it works for. I mean, this is what we need to be able to do. So again, think about it as an investment. It is not a line item. I did not spend $200,000 for a drug. I invested $200,000 to actually determine how well it's going to work for the patient, to be able to monitor the benefits it has for the patients, to be able to keep them out of having more serious disabling kinds of conditions. And if it's not working that way, we're going to get them off that drug and we're going to invest in something else. I mean, that's what we're talking about. If these therapies work, I mean, the reason why we have all these concerns is the uncertainty of it. Who gets to be on a drug? How well does it work? How long does it work for? It's an investment, like you would do anything else. So build a proper investment program, monitor that, and bring it back. So I think there's a lot of room for us to think about, what it is that we can do. And I think many companies would be very happy to partner with us in terms of investing in the follow-up program, the monitoring program. We're all going to get not the individual patient data back, but we'll get aggregated data back. With healthcare professionals, we'll get individual data back. The patients themselves. People say, what if patients don't want to come off the drug? You got to give them the data. You got to show them. Here it's working. It's tough, we know. It's got a lot of side effects. You're really struggling with it, but it's working for you. Continue. Here's what your data says. It's not doing what it is we anticipate. In fact, it's having these other kind of harms. We think you should come off of it. I mean, what patient's going to say, oh, no, I just really want to insist? You got to give people information. You got to collect that information. I think we could build a really responsible, sustainable, but also really, cost-effective, rare disease drug program.
Mm-hmm. Now, in Canada, we'll focus on Canada. Healthcare is delivered by the provinces. So maybe can you elaborate a little bit more on the role of the provinces as part through a national accord? And then, is there, should there be a national rare disease policy that addresses funding? And I'll ask the question, should this be part of a global initiative? Like, should there be a global, rare disease initiative potentially led by the WHO.
Yeah, okay, we'll set the WHO aside for half a second. But it's true. It could be, and it should be, and it is, to be honest with you. Yes, each of the provinces has to buy in. And this is our job right now. Quebec, interestingly enough, is way ahead of the game. They've got a rare disease strategy. They're just waiting for the federal government to come out with this $1 billion and say, okay, let's go off to the races, right? What we need to do is make sure that their strategy and each of the provincial strategies actually work. Ontario produced a rare disease strategy back in 2017. Court created the first Canadian rare disease strategy. We launched it in 2015. We took it to Parliament, and they didn't actually adopt it, but they accepted it, and that has been kind of the framework that everybody's been working from, and was sort of the genesis of the rare disease drug strategy that was really done in 2019. In fact, we almost had an orphan drug policy, back in 2012, 2014. It was actually written, it was never adopted. So we know that there is a framework and there's thinking. So, but it has to be bought in at the provincial level, and this has been one of the challenges. And we're hoping now with the health accord and hopefully the transfers, and even though nobody was absolutely happy with everything that came, that they're going to sign off on that and we can move on to other things, hopefully. So get their attention on this. The monies are there. We need the provinces to buy into it. We need them to adopt this. So this rare disease network, like the European reference network, which brings in, some 26 countries, would bring in, 10 provinces and 3 territories. It would be something that everybody would sign on to. So it's not that difficult to think about. I mean, we're excited by the fact that, the PCPA, the Pan-Canadian Access Alliance has actually now set up its own initiative. We see that they could be an interesting negotiating body that companies can go to directly. You've got a drug approval, go hunker down with them. And if we have a rare disease network with centers of expertise, hunker down with them to come up with the best plan for what would be the criteria for access, what are we monitoring, how do we determine whether it's working, and what could be a starting price. That's kind of what Germany does, what France does, that's kind of what Belgium does. Let's start with a price, collect the information. We will be able to analyze that information, and we'll come back and we can renegotiate the price based on how well it's actually working. So that's the kind of flexibility that we need. And we can do it because this is a small number of drugs. And a small number of patients. We're not negotiating, for hundreds of thousands, of patients with cancer or cardiovascular disease. We can monitor and access each and every one of these patients to make sure that we're bringing back the results that we're supposed to. But yes, the provinces do have to be on side. They have to see that this investment is a net benefit to them because it will keep patients from coming into ER. It will keep patients from being undiagnosed and getting misdiagnosed and clogging up all other kinds of health systems. If the fact is that 9 out of 10 pediatric beds, and I've heard, Dr. Cohn from Sick Kids say that, he says 7 to 9 of my patients in my critical care hospital, in my emergency rooms, are taken up by rare disease patients. If we can keep those patients out, guess what? You got resources available for other patients. So we can do that. And I think we need to show that this is an investment. Let's see how, what do we get out of it? So yes, we have to be able to, create, that narrative and be able to get buy-in to it and then be able to implement it. And hopefully, each province will still be its own jurisdiction, but that they will, in fact, be able to work under comparable plans. I mean, we're not expecting the province to own the network. They don't have to own the network. It can be, it's like, the medical association. It's like the College of Family Physicians. It's its own entity.
Yeah, the premiers are meeting with the Prime Minister, discuss healthcare funding. I don't believe rare disease funding is on the agenda. Should it be, and should we advocate for a national accord?
No, we have the rare disease drug strategy. They put $1 billion on the table. We just need to spend $1 billion. And we have really hopefully convinced them that don't spend $1 billion to create pharmacare for rare diseases, invest it in infrastructure. So I like to keep it out of the mess of the rest of it.
Yes.
Can you just shove my $1 billion over to the side, keep it for where it is, and let us play with that $1 billion. Don't get mixed up in this mess where it's certainly going to a knee clinic. I don't want to go into a knee clinic. Yeah.
So you brought up some international examples. These are HTA models, so health technology assessment models.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I forgot what else you asked me. This is true. So the rare
Yeah.
disease network we have is meant to be part of the global rare disease
Hmm.
network. So Rare Disease International and WHO have a memorandum of understanding, and one of the things that's in that is that we would create and we would work with them to have a global rare disease network. So within 3 years in the making, our model follows very much what the proposed WHO global model looks like. And we are hoping if we can get this together, we're now at the stage with the WHO network that we're proposing proof of concepts, pilot. I don't want to call them pilots because each area will be different, but proof of concepts. And we are pushing for Canada to actually be a proof of concept, a demonstration of what a national rare disease network can do and how it would function. So I think that's going to happen, and that we will be part of then a global network of rare disease networks, all of whom would be sharing resources, consulting with each other, doing joint research, looking very different maybe, depending on the region of the country. And Europe already has them with the European Reference Network. Latin America, has some key centers that they're hoping will be kind of like the kingpins, center in Brazil, that will be, the kingpins of how they can build, on their networks as well. Maybe look differently, but yes, the whole, I mean, that's the whole idea, right? And again, going back to, rare disease is global. Most of our specialists, in fact, work with specialists internationally because these diseases are small. You're not going to learn a whole lot by just looking in your own backyard. So I think, this is one of the areas where networking, global networking, is just a natural.
Yeah. All right, let's switch back to Rare Disease Day. So this year it'll be celebrated on the last day of February, which is February the 28th. What events is CORD planning to mark this day?
Well, we don't have a national event. We are here in Ontario, so we will be opening our day with a breakfast at Queen's Park, and we will have representative from Sick Kids will be talking about the vision for it. One of the patients who has a treatment that's coming through will be talking about what the importance of in terms of having a plan. We have just learned yesterday, and I hope I'm not premature in saying this because we just saw Minister Jones yesterday, and she assured us that she's going to come and open the breakfast for us. So that would be good. We were hoping
Nice.
they would announce a rare disease strategy. I don't know if they're quite ready to do that yet, but so we will be there and we will be a part of the process. In some of the other provinces as well, there will be some actions that will be taking place within the provincial legislatures, which are, opportunities to get rare disease day recognized. I think in almost every province we're having some signatures and we're having lights. Downtown here in Toronto, we will have at not at Nathanville, it's in City Hall. The lights there will be done in the colors for rare diseases. We almost always get the CN Tower that's lit up. So, the Alberta Bridge, etc. We have, demonstrations of, and each one of many of our groups, muscular dystrophy, others are doing events. They're doing advocacy events, they're doing celebratory events. So we're hopefully going to be able to have some of those shown on the website, either for Rare Disease Day or on the CORD website, so that people can really join in if they are in the area or if they are particularly attracted to that day. So it will hopefully, and some of the clinics as well are doing education days, within their clinics. So it's a great opportunity for people to say, okay, we need to do the awareness. We need to create some momentum around it. CORD itself will be hosting our actual conference for Rare Disease Day. It's in March 28th and 29th in Ottawa. And we're hoping to do also an action day with departments, et cetera, to, again, really lay out what we believe this rare disease drug strategy, rare disease strategy looks like, and maybe even by that time have the framework for Canada's Rare Disease Network in place. And we invite everybody to come to Ottawa with us.
Awesome. How can our audience get involved?
Well, you can certainly, we are going to have a number of campaigns that will be online. So if you sign on to our website, you'll see linkages to a letter writing campaign, an advocacy campaign. We're going to be releasing our survey, which really shows the impact of rare diseases in in Canada, the delay to access to therapy, access to specialists, access to treatment, the burden it has. So we'd love people to sign on to it and actually add their voices to say, this is an urgent matter. We need to do with that. As I see, some of the disease groups themselves, cystic fibrosis is doing an action. Muscular dystrophy has got an advocacy campaign they're putting out to really encourage awareness, but also access. So, we'll have a number of events that'll be listed on our website. We encourage people to take a look and, and if you can, go in person or, kind of join us in terms of putting your message there as well.
Any final insights you want to share with the audience? Any questions I didn't ask?
No, I'm really delighted. That was a great comprehensive discussion. I'm just so excited. And, it seems like every single time I speak, we get a little bit more information. We're a little bit further along. And I am saying is that every step of the way, I feel like more and more positive that this is actually going to happen. So it's a long time coming. 4 years, we've been kind of waiting for this, $1 billion to be kind of brought into place. And so, we feel like it's close. But we have, even in my meeting just now, they said, we're saying, look, we can't really let you know. We've got some parts that are not ready. And my point is, I would rather us do it right than to just do it for the sake of doing it. So I think that's important. And we are really, hoping that, this support, and we have been just delighted with the support of the whole community, the rare disease patient community. We've been working together, which is very exciting. The clinicians and the specialists have all joined us in. Pharmaceutical companies have really stepped up and be able to be a strong partner in what we're doing. And many of the other kind of allied groups have really, been a huge supporter all along the way. So, it's been, really important that we have everybody who's engaged in whatever part of rare diseases they're involved in to kind of come together on this.
Well, Durhane, thank you for being a guest on the Pharma Podcast and sharing your insight. But most importantly, thank you for being such an amazing advocate for patients with rare disorders. You really are a national treasure. So,
that's so sweet of you to say. And you know what? I'm just so excited because I really can see that, we're making the progress and we're really going to be able to deliver. So, this is good.
So how can our listeners connect with you and with CORT?
Well, we have a website. We have social media. We have a Twitter. We have a Facebook. We have a LinkedIn. So sign on, follow us. And we will have certainly lots of social media stuff that will be going out, leading up to and coming out of Rare Disease Day and into our conference. So, yes, whatever you can, follow us, share the message, retweet and and forward messages. And as I say, we're going to do a couple more webinars between now and even our March event. And we're thrilled always that we get such great speakers there and audiences there. So we're hoping to continue to be, providing information out there. It's the only way to do it. So yeah, stay engaged with us.
Contact details for Durhane will be made available on our website at thepharmapodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. The Pharma Podcast is available to listen to for free on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and on our website at thepharmapodcast.ca. We are also available on YouTube. Please subscribe and follow me on LinkedIn to stay up to date on future podcasts. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast, or if there is a topic we should cover in future episodes, please connect with me via LinkedIn.